The notification chimed on my phone at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was folding laundry in my small kitchen, humming an old tune Robert used to whistle, when the screen lit up with a Facebook alert. My daughter Jessica had tagged me in a post. My heart fluttered with that familiar maternal warmth, thinking she'd shared a memory or a sweet message about our weekend coffee date. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I tapped the notification with eager fingers, and the world tilted sideways. The post showed a photo of me from last Sunday, taken without my knowledge while I was struggling to carry groceries up the stairs to Jessica's townhouse. My face was red from exertion, my gray hair escaping from its ponytail, and I looked every bit of my 62 years. But it wasn't the unflattering angle that made my blood freeze. It was the caption. When your mom becomes the burden you never signed up for. Can't even carry groceries without drama. Some of us have lives to live. Anyone else dealing with aging parents who don't know when to step back? The comments section was already filling up with laughing emojis and responses from her friends. Girl, I feel you. Time for assisted living. My mom's the same way, so needy. Each comment felt like a slap across my face. My hands trembling, I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, in black and white, for all 800 of her Facebook friends to see. My daughter had turned me into a punchline. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. I stared at the cracked screen, my reflection fractured in the spiderweb of broken glass, and felt something inside me shatter along with it. This was my Jessica, my only child, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to read just one more story. The same child who used to tell her friends that her mom was the prettiest woman in the world. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through the comments again. 23 people had liked the post. 23 people found my struggle amusing. Among them were neighbors I'd known for years, colleagues from Jessica's work, even some distant relatives. People who knew me, who had eaten at my dinner table, who had received birthday cards and Christmas presents from my hands. The worst part wasn't the humiliation, though that burned through my chest like acid. It was the realization that this wasn't spontaneous cruelty. Jessica had taken that photo deliberately, waited for the right moment to capture me at my most vulnerable, then crafted that caption with surgical precision. She had weaponized my love for her. I sank into the worn armchair that had been Robert's favorite, the one I couldn't bring myself to replace even 3 years after his heart attack. The fabric still smelled faintly of his cologne on quiet evenings when I let myself remember. Now I pulled my knees to my chest like a child, and let the tears come, hot and bitter and long overdue. My name is Myrna Richardson, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought I knew who I was. I was a retired elementary school teacher who had devoted 38 years to shaping young minds. I was a widow who had nursed my husband through his final illness with the same tenderness I'd shown him during our 41 years of marriage. I was a mother who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter the best life possible, working double shifts as a substitute teacher and weekend tutor to pay for her college, her wedding, her down payment on that beautiful townhouse where she now lived with her husband Marcus. But according to Facebook, according to my own daughter, I was just a burden. The irony cut deep because I had been trying so hard not to be exactly that. After Robert died, I made a conscious decision to give Jessica space. I didn't call every day, though I wanted to. I didn't drop by unannounced, though I missed the days when her home felt like mine too. I waited for invitations, accepted whatever scraps of time she offered, and pretended it was enough. When she asked me to help with grocery shopping because Marcus was working overtime and she had a big presentation at work, I said yes immediately. When she mentioned how expensive everything was getting, I quietly slipped an extra $50 into her purse while she wasn't looking. When she sighed about how overwhelming life felt sometimes, I listened without offering advice she hadn't asked for. I thought I was being the perfect mother, supportive but not intrusive, helpful but not demanding. I thought I was respecting her independence while still being present in her life. I thought wrong. The comments kept coming as I sat there. A woman named Brenda, whom I remembered as one of Jessica's college roommates, had written, "At least she still tries to help out." My mom just complains about everything and expects me to fix it. Someone else had replied, "True, but look at that face. Pure guilt trip energy. Guilt trip energy." I studied the photo again, trying to see myself through their eyes. Yes, I looked tired. Yes, I was struggling with bags that were probably too heavy for someone my age. But I saw something they missed. The determined set of my jaw, the way I was gripping those bags like they contained precious cargo instead of just milk and bread and the organic pasta Jessica preferred. I saw a woman who would carry anything, endure anything, for the people she loved. They saw a burden. I saw love made visible. My phone buzzed with a text message, and my heart leaped thinking Jessica had come to her senses and was calling to apologize. Instead, it was my neighbor Elena, a woman in her 70s who lived in the apartment above mine. "Mija, I saw what happened online. That girl needs to learn some respect. Come upstairs. I made extra arroz con pollo." Elena had seen it. If Elena had seen it, that meant other people in our building probably had too. The humiliation spread like ripples in a pond, reaching places I couldn't control or contain. I imagined walking to the mailbox tomorrow, wondering who had laughed at my expense, who pitied me, who saw me differently now. I texted back a polite decline, claiming I wasn't hungry, though the truth was I couldn't imagine swallowing food past the knot in my throat. Elena responded immediately with a string of Spanish words I didn't understand but could interpret from context. She was cursing Jessica in 2 languages, and somehow that made me feel a little less alone. The post had been up for 3 hours when I finally worked up the courage to call Jessica directly. My hands shook as I dialed her number, and I had to hang up twice before I could let it ring through. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright and casual. "Hey Mom, what's up?" As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just held me up for public ridicule. As if my heart wasn't broken into pieces on my kitchen floor. "Jessica," I began, my voice hoarse from crying. "I saw your post." A pause. Then, in a tone that made her sound like a stranger, "Oh, that? Yes, that. Why would you do such a thing?" She sighed, and I could picture her rolling her eyes the way she used to when I asked her to clean her room. "Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just social media. Nobody takes it seriously." 23 people liked it, I said quietly. They seemed to take it seriously enough. "Look, I was having a rough day, okay? Marcus is stressed about work. I'm drowning in deadlines. And then you showed up struggling with those bags like you were proving some kind of point. It was frustrating. I was trying to help you." "I know, but—" Another sigh, heavier this time. "Mom, sometimes your help feels like pressure. Like you're trying so hard to be needed that it makes everyone uncomfortable." The words hit me like a physical blow. Trying so hard to be needed. Was that what I'd been doing? Was my love so desperate, so transparent, that it had become a source of embarrassment? "I don't understand," I whispered. "Of course you don't," Jessica said, and there was an eye tree, porti turacide.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Edge to her voice now, impatience bleeding through the forced patience. "You never understand when people need space. You hover, Mom. You hover and you guilt trip and you make everything about how much you've sacrificed. I have never said a word about sacrifice. You don't have to say it. It's in every look, every gesture, every time you slip money into my purse like I'm still a child who can't take care of herself. It's suffocating." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. "If my presence in your life is such a burden, Jessica, then perhaps I should remove it." "Don't be ridiculous," she said quickly, but there was relief in her voice that she couldn't quite hide. "You're being emotional." Emotional. As if my hurt was unreasonable. As if public humiliation was something a mother should accept with grace and understanding. "Take down the post," I said. "Mom." "Take it down, Jessica, please." Another pause, longer this time. "Fine, I'll think about it." But she didn't take it down. When I checked an hour later, the post was still there, now with 31 likes and even more comments. Someone had shared it with the caption, "Millennial Mood," and that version had been liked 47 times. I turned off my phone and sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that suddenly felt very small. The walls were covered with photographs of Jessica at every stage of her life: first day of kindergarten, high school graduation, wedding day. In every picture, I was beside her, beaming with pride, my arm around her shoulders, or my hand touching her face with infinite tenderness. When had that love become a burden? When had my presence become something to escape rather than cherish? I thought about Robert, how he used to worry that I gave too much of myself to others. "Myrna," he'd say, watching me grade papers late into the night or bake cookies for the school fundraiser when I was already exhausted. "You can't pour from an empty cup." But I never felt empty when I was giving. I felt full, purposeful, necessary. Now I wondered if Robert had seen something I couldn't, some desperate edge to my generosity that pushed people away even as I tried to draw them closer. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a headache that felt like my skull was too small for my brain. The post was still up, now with 59 likes and a comment thread that had devolved into a general discussion about difficult parents and generational differences. I had become a case study in what not to let your mother become. I made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly and sat at my small kitchen table, looking out at the parking lot where I used to watch Jessica practice riding her bike. She had been so determined, so fearless, pumping her little legs faster and faster until she could coast without help. I had run behind her for hours, one hand on the seat, ready to catch her if she fell. When had I become the one falling? And why was there no one left to catch me? My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Took down the post. Happy now?" But she hadn't taken it down. I could still see the comments multiplying like bacteria in a petri dish. Either she was lying, or she didn't know how social media worked well enough to actually delete it. Neither possibility spoke well of her character or competence. I stared at that text for a long time, trying to find the right words for a response. Part of me wanted to thank her, to pretend that this gesture was enough to heal the wound she'd opened. Part of me wanted to unleash 3 years of careful politeness, to tell her exactly what her cruelty had cost me. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since she was a teenager. I ignored her completely. The silence felt strange and powerful. For 28 years, I had been available to Jessica instantly, unconditionally. When she called, I answered. When she needed something, I provided it. When she was hurt, or angry, or confused, I dropped everything to help her process her feelings. I had trained her to expect my immediate attention, my endless patience, my limitless forgiveness. Now, for the first time, she would have to wonder what I was thinking. She would have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing whether I was angry or hurt or simply done with her. The uncertainty would eat at her in a way that my predictable responses never had. My phone buzzed twice more over the next hour. 2 more texts from Jessica, each one a little more desperate than the last. "Mom, are you okay?" I said I took it down. "Why aren't you answering?" I left them unread and went for a walk instead, something I'd been meaning to do more often since the doctor said I needed to get my blood pressure under control. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and the maple trees that lined my street had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold. I had lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, but I realized I'd never really looked at it before, never taken the time to notice how the light fell through the leaves, or how the elderly man in the blue house kept his garden so meticulously maintained. I had been too busy looking toward Jessica's life, trying to find my place in it, to notice the beauty that existed in my own. As I walked, I thought about the responses to Jessica's post, the casual cruelty of strangers who felt entitled to judge my worth based on a single photograph. But I also thought about Elena's immediate defense of me, about the mailman who always asked about my health, about Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaners who saved me the good hangers and never charged me for minor alterations. There were people in my life who valued me, who saw my worth, who would never dream of making me the subject of public ridicule. They weren't my blood relatives, but they were my community, and maybe that mattered more than I'd given it credit for. When I returned home, my phone showed 6 missed calls from Jessica and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. The last one made me pause. "Mom, I'm starting to worry. Please just tell me you're alive." So I was still useful as a source of worry, still capable of commanding her attention when I withheld what she expected from me. It was a bitter kind of power, but it was power nonetheless. I texted back a single word: alive. Her response came immediately: "Thank God." I was about to drive over there. The thought of Jessica actually concerned enough to leave her house and check on me should have been comforting. Instead, it felt hollow. She was worried about my physical safety, but she had felt no concern for my emotional well-being when she posted that photograph. She feared I might be dead, but she had felt free to kill my dignity in front of hundreds of people. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer position at the library. I had been helping with the children's reading program every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 2 years, ever since retirement left me with too much time and too little purpose. The children loved me, and I loved them, and the work reminded me why I had become a teacher in the first place. But tonight, I couldn't bear the thought of being around innocence and trust and unconditional affection. I couldn't pretend to believe in the goodness of family bonds when my own family had just demonstrated how easily love could be weaponized. Instead, I poured a glass of the wine Robert and I used to save for special occasions and sat down at my computer. I had avoided social media for most of my life, finding it overwhelming and artificial, but Jessica's post had forced me to confront its power. If she could use it to hurt me, perhaps I could use it to understand her. I created a Facebook account using my full name, Myrna Elizabeth Richardson, and uploaded a profile picture Robert had taken of me in our garden the summer before he died. I looked happy in that photo, genuinely happy, surrounded by the tomatoes and roses I'd spent months nurturing. It was a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. Then I searched for Jessica's profile and found the post that had started it all. In the hours since I'd last looked, it had accumulated even more responses. Someone had commented, "This is why I'm never having kids," and another person had replied, "Kids are fine if you don't spoil them. This mom probably did everything for her daughter and now expects gratitude." The assumptions hurt almost as much as the original cruelty. These strangers were writing my story for me, deciding who I was and what I deserved based on a single moment captured without my consent. They had turned my love into a cautionary tale about helicopter parenting and emotional manipulation. But as I scrolled through Jessica's other posts, I began to see a pattern that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't the first time she'd used me as content for her social media presence. There were subtle digs scattered throughout her timeline. Complaints about family drama that were clearly about me, posts about boundaries that included pointed commentary about older generations who don't understand personal space. 3 weeks ago, she had posted a photo of an expensive handbag with the caption, "Treat yourself Tuesday." Sometimes you have to buy your own gifts because not everyone understands your style. I remembered that day clearly. I had given her a scarf for her birthday, a beautiful silk piece I'd found at an estate sale, and thought would complement her work wardrobe. She had thanked me politely, but now I understood her true feelings about my gift. A month before that, she had shared an article about emotional labor with the comment, "When you realize you've been managing everyone else's feelings your whole life." The article was about romantic relationships, but Jessica had tagged me in the comments with a simple, "Thoughts?" At the time, I had assumed she was asking for my perspective as someone who had been married for 4 decades. Now I realized she was making a point about our relationship, suggesting that I was demanding emotional labor from her that she resented providing. 6 months of posts painted a picture I'd been too naive or too hopeful to see clearly. I wasn't Jessica's beloved mother who occasionally appeared in her social media feed as a source of pride and affection. I was a recurring character in her online narrative, the overbearing parent, the emotional burden, the cautionary tale about what happens when women don't know how to let go. She had been documenting my failures as a mother and sharing them with hundreds of people, turning our private moments into public entertainment. Every time I helped her with something, every time I expressed concern or offered advice, every time I showed up when she called, I was potentially providing content for her next post about difficult family members. The realization hit me like cold water. Jessica didn't just find me burdensome in the moment, she found me useful as a source of material for her online persona. My pain was her content. My love was her comedy. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me. Upstairs, Elena was watching a telenovela with the volume turned up too high. Next door, the college student was playing music I didn't recognize but found oddly comforting in its rhythmic predictability. These were the sounds of life continuing, of people going about their evenings without drama or cruelty or betrayal. For the first time since Robert died, I felt truly alone. But I also felt something else, something harder and sharper than loneliness. I felt angry. The anger surprised me with its clarity and strength. I had spent 3 years being carefully grateful for whatever attention Jessica chose to give me, afraid that any display of need or disappointment might drive her further away. I had swallowed hurt after hurt, made excuse after excuse, convinced myself that this was simply how adult children related to their parents in the modern world. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't the natural evolution of a mother-daughter relationship. This was abuse, dressed up in millennial language about boundaries and emotional labor, but still recognizable as the systematic degradation of someone who loved too much and asked for too little in return. I thought about the students I'd taught over the years, the ones who came from homes where love was conditional and approval was earned through performance. I had always been able to recognize the signs: the excessive people-pleasing, the inability to advocate for themselves, the way they apologized for taking up space. I had worked to give those children what they weren't getting at home: unconditional acceptance, patient guidance, the knowledge that they were worthy of love simply for existing. Now I wondered if I had become one of those children so desperate for Jessica's approval that I had allowed her to train me to accept mistreatment as normal. I had taught her that my love came without conditions or consequences, that she could hurt me repeatedly and I would always forgive her, always come back for more. But teachers know something about love that parents sometimes forget. True love includes boundaries. True love sometimes requires consequences. True love doesn't enable bad behavior in the name of keeping peace. I had failed Jessica by teaching her that love meant never having to face the results of cruelty. I had failed myself by accepting less than I deserved from the person I had loved most completely. It was time to stop failing both of us. The next morning I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I made coffee, showered, and dressed carefully in clothes that made me feel competent and professional. Then I sat down at my computer and began to research something I'd never imagined I would need to know about: my daughter's financial situation. It took me most of the morning, but the internet revealed more than I'd expected. Property records showed that Jessica and Marcus had purchased their townhouse 18 months ago, with a mortgage that was significantly larger than I'd realized. Credit reports weren't available to me, of course, but social media told its own story of financial stress hidden behind carefully curated images of success. The expensive handbag Jessica had posted about, it appeared in her photos for exactly 2 weeks before disappearing, suggesting it had been returned. The vacation photos from last summer? All taken at local spots that had been made to look more exotic through careful cropping and filtering. The dinner photos at upscale restaurants? Almost all appeared to be lunch portions or appetizers, not full meals. Jessica and Marcus were living beyond their means, maintaining an image of prosperity that was costing them more than they could afford. And I realized, with a clarity that should have come sooner, that this was why Jessica had been so resentful of my attempts to help. Not because she didn't need help, but because she needed it too much and hated herself for the needing. Every time I offered assistance, I reminded her of her own inadequacy. Every time I slipped money into her purse, I highlighted the gap between the life she wanted to live and the life she could actually afford. My generosity had become a mirror that reflected her failures, and she had learned to resent the mirror instead of addressing what it showed her. But understanding Jessica's motivations didn't excuse her cruelty. If anything, it made her behavior more inexcusable, because it revealed calculation behind what I had assumed was impulse. She had turned me into a scapegoat for her own financial anxiety, using me as a target for anger that belonged elsewhere. I spent the afternoon making phone calls and taking notes, preparing for a conversation I should have had years ago. By evening, I had all the information I needed and a plan that felt both terrifying and necessary. Jessica called at 7 o'clock, her voice bright with false cheer. "Hi, Mom. You've been so quiet. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling clear," I said. "Jessica, we need to talk." "Oh no," she said with a nervous laugh. "That sounds ominous." What did I do now? The casual assumption that she had done something wrong, paired with the equally casual dismissal of its importance, told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our relationship. I was the perpetually offended mother, she was the perpetually innocent daughter, and any conflict between us was automatically my fault for being too sensitive. "I've been thinking about your post," I said. "Mom, I told you I took it down." "No, you didn't. It's still there. And even if you had taken it down, that wouldn't change what you did. It wouldn't change the fact that you deliberately humiliated me in front of hundreds of people." Silence. Then, in a smaller voice, "I was having a bad day. And you decided to make mine worse. You decided that your momentary frustration was more important than my dignity. I didn't think." "No, you didn't think. You haven't been thinking for a long time, Jessica. You've been feeling and reacting and expecting me to absorb the consequences of your emotions without complaint. That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Is it fair that I spent $40,000 on your wedding? Is it fair that I gave you the down payment for your house? Is it fair that I've been helping with your expenses for years, while you post pictures of designer bags and fancy restaurants? How do you know about my expenses?" Her voice was rising now, defensive and angry. "Because I pay attention, Jessica. Because I notice when someone I love is struggling. But apparently, caring about your well-being makes me a burden. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Then explain it to me. Talk to me like I'm your mother, who loves you, instead of posting about me like I'm a stranger who deserves ridicule." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "Everything is so hard, Mom. The mortgage, Marcus's job, trying to keep up with everyone else. I feel like I'm drowning, and every time you try to help, it reminds me that I can't handle my own life." There it was, the truth under all the cruelty. Jessica wasn't angry at me for loving her too much. She was angry at herself for needing love she felt she didn't deserve, for failing to achieve the independence she'd been taught to value above everything else. "So you decided to punish me for witnessing your struggles," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to punish you, I needed to feel like someone understood what I was going through. And you thought publicly shaming me would accomplish that? I wasn't thinking about shaming you. I was thinking about myself." At least she was being honest now. "Jessica, when you make someone else the villain in your story, you don't solve your problems. You just create new ones." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I really am sorry." "I believe you're sorry," I said. "But sorry isn't enough anymore." "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and stepped into the space I'd been afraid to occupy for 3 years. The space of a mother who demanded respect instead of begging for affection. "I mean that our relationship is going to change. I'm not going to be available for your convenience anymore. I'm not going to accept being treated like a burden while being expected to function like a bank. Mom, I'm not finished. The money I've given you over the years, the wedding, the house, the hundreds of smaller gifts and loans, that was never free money. It was an investment in our relationship, in the idea that family takes care of each other. But you've made it clear that you see my investment as a burden rather than a gift. That's not true. Then prove it. Show me that you value our relationship as much as you value my financial support. Show me that you see me as a mother worth respecting instead of a problem worth complaining about." "How?" she asked, and for the first time in our conversation she sounded genuinely curious rather than defensive. Start by taking down that post. Really taking it down, not just telling me you have. Then post an apology that's as public as your mockery was. An apology? Mom, I can't just... You can and you will. If you want to continue having a relationship with me, you'll acknowledge that what you did was wrong. You'll take responsibility for your cruelty instead of making excuses for it. And if I don't? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. But I had come too far to turn. Back now. Then you'll learn what it's really like to be a burden, Jessica. You'll learn what life looks like without someone who loves you unconditionally. She was crying now, harsh sobs that might have broken my heart a week ago. Now they sounded like the tears of a child who had finally been told no, who was learning for the first time that actions have consequences even when they're directed at people who love you. I'll think about it, she said finally. Don't think too long, I replied. Some opportunities don't wait forever. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling both empty and full, exhausted and energized. I had just done something I'd never done before. I had prioritized my own dignity over my daughter's comfort. I had chosen self-respect over self-sacrifice. It felt terrifying and liberating and completely necessary. Whether Jessica would rise to meet my expectations or choose to lose me rather than admit her mistakes remained to be seen. But for the first time in 3 years, the outcome felt like her choice rather than her burden. And that, I thought as I poured myself another glass of wine, was exactly as it should be. 3 days passed without a word from Jessica. 3 days of silence that felt both punishing and liberating. I found myself checking my phone less frequently, sleeping more soundly, and noticing details about my own life that had been invisible when I was constantly focused on hers. The way morning light slanted through my bedroom window, the satisfaction of completing a crossword puzzle without help, the pleasure of choosing what to have for dinner based on my own preferences rather than what I thought might appeal to a daughter who rarely accepted my invitations anyway. On Thursday morning, I was watering the small herb garden I kept on my balcony when Mrs. Patterson from 4B approached me in the hallway. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 80s who had lived in the building longer than anyone else and seemed to know everyone's business without being malicious about it. "Myrna, dear," she said, adjusting her reading glasses, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you in some kind of legal trouble?" The question startled me so completely that I nearly dropped my watering can. Legal trouble? What would make you think that? "Well, there was a gentleman here yesterday asking about you. Very professional, with a briefcase and everything. He left a card under your door when you didn't answer." My heart began to race. In my distraction over Jessica's betrayal, I hadn't checked my mail or noticed anything slipped under my door. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and hurried back to my apartment, finding a crisp white business card lying on my carpet just inside the threshold. The card read, "Jonathan Castillo, Estate Recovery Specialist, Sunrise Legal Services." There was a phone number and an email address, but no indication of what kind of estate recovery he specialized in, or why he might want to speak with me. I turned the card over and found a handwritten note. "Mrs. Richardson, I have information regarding the estate of Margaret Holloway that may be of significant financial benefit to you. Please call at your earliest convenience. Time-sensitive matter." Margaret Holloway. The name triggered a distant memory, something from the edges of my consciousness that I couldn't quite grasp. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the card and trying to place the name. Margaret Holloway. Margaret Holloway. It felt familiar but not immediately recognizable. Like a song you've heard but can't name. Then, with the sudden clarity that sometimes comes when you stop trying so hard to remember, it came to me. Margaret Holloway had been one of my students, not recently, but decades ago, when I was still a young teacher finding my footing in the profession. She had been in my 3rd grade class during my 2nd year of teaching, a quiet girl with enormous brown eyes and clothes that were always a little too big for her small frame. I remembered Margaret now with the vividness that comes when memory suddenly unlocks itself. She had been one of those children who break your heart a little. Every day, Obviously bright, but struggling with material that should have been easy for her, polite but withdrawn, eager to please but convinced she was destined to disappoint. Her home life had been chaotic, with a mother who worked multiple jobs and a father whose presence was sporadic and usually alcohol-influenced. Margaret had stayed after school frequently, not because she was in trouble, but because she seemed reluctant to go home. I had started keeping crackers and juice boxes in my desk drawer, ostensibly for all the children but really for her, because I suspected she often went hungry. When she struggled with reading, I worked with her one-on-one during lunch periods. When she came to school with bruises she couldn't explain, I made the necessary calls to social services, though nothing ever seemed to come of them. But Margaret had been special in ways that went beyond her circumstances. She had possessed an intuitive understanding of other people's emotions that was remarkable in someone so young. She could sense when another child was upset before anyone else noticed. She would quietly share her supplies with classmates who had forgotten theirs. She drew pictures constantly, intricate, beautiful drawings that showed a level of artistic talent that was extraordinary for an 8-year-old. I remembered the last day I saw her. It was near the end of the school year, and her mother had come to tell me they were moving. Margaret had clung to me, her small arms wrapped around my waist, promising to write letters and stay in touch. I had given her a box of art supplies and a journal, telling her to keep drawing and writing no matter where life took her. She had written twice. I still had those letters somewhere, carefully preserved in a box of mementos from my teaching years. The first had come a few months after she left, full of excitement about her new school and descriptions of the friends she was making. The second had arrived almost a year later, shorter and sadder, mentioning that her family had moved again and that she missed her old life. After that, silence. Over the years I had wondered about her occasionally, hoping she had found stability and happiness, that her artistic gifts had been nurtured, that someone had seen her worth the way I had tried to. But life moves forward, new students come and go, and eventually Margaret Holloway had become just one of hundreds of children I had taught and worried about and loved in the way teachers love students, completely but from a distance. Now, apparently Margaret Holloway was dead, and somehow her death was connected to a financial benefit for me. The combination felt surreal and heartbreaking. I wanted to know what had happened to her, but I was also afraid to learn the details. Sometimes ignorance preserves the hopeful stories we tell ourselves about people we've lost touch with. I called the number on Jonathan Castillo's card and reached a receptionist who transferred me immediately when I gave my name. Mr. Castillo had a warm, professional voice with a slight accent that I couldn't place. "Mrs. Richardson, thank you so much for calling. I've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Margaret Holloway. I understand you were her teacher many years ago?" "Yes. She was one of my students. Can you tell me what happened to her?" "I'm afraid Ms. Holloway passed away 6 months ago from complications related to cancer. She was 53. 53. The number hit me like a physical blow. Margaret would have been 53, which meant she had lived only 45 years since leaving my classroom. It seemed impossibly brief, a life cut short, just as it should have been reaching its fullest expression. "I'm very sorry to hear that," I managed. "She was a lovely child." "That's actually why I'm calling," Mr. Castillo said. "Ms. Holloway left very specific instructions regarding her estate. She had been quite successful. She became a renowned artist, actually, with work in several major museums. Her estate is valued at approximately $8 million. The number was so large that my mind couldn't quite process it. Margaret, the little girl who had shared her lunch with hungrier classmates, had somehow accumulated nearly $3 million. The art supplies I had given her had grown into something magnificent. "That's wonderful," I said, though wonderful felt inadequate. She was so talented even as a child. "Mrs. Richardson, Ms. Holloway left a letter specifically for you, along with a bequest. Would it be possible for me to come by and deliver these items in person? There are some legal documents that require your signature." "A bequest? For me?" The words felt foreign in my mouth. "Are you sure you have the right person?" "Quite sure. Margaret Holloway, born April 15, 1971, student at Riverside Elementary School in the late 1970s. Teacher, Mrs. Myrna Richardson. Does that sound accurate? It did sound accurate, but it also sounded impossible. Mr. Castillo, I haven't seen or heard from Margaret in over 40 years. Why would she leave me anything? I think the letter will explain that better than I can. When would be a good time for me to visit? We arranged to meet the following afternoon. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like the world had shifted on its axis in some fundamental way. In the space of a week, I had lost my relationship with my daughter and gained an unexpected connection to a student I had loved and lost track of decades ago. The universe seemed to be engaging in some kind of cosmic balancing act that I couldn't understand but was afraid to question. I spent the rest of the day trying to remember everything I could about Margaret. I dug through my closets until I found the box of teaching mementos I had saved when I retired. Among the class photos, handmade cards and drawings from various students over the years, I found Margaret's 2 letters. Her careful third-grade handwriting faded but still legible. The first letter was exactly as I remembered it, excited, hopeful, full of details about her new school and descriptions of the art class she was taking. But reading the second letter with adult eyes, I could see things I had missed when it first arrived. The sadness was more profound than I had realized. She wrote about missing, quote, the way you made me feel smart, and how safe I felt in your classroom. She mentioned that her new teachers didn't seem to notice when she was having trouble, and that art class had been canceled due to budget cuts. The letter ended with a promise to keep drawing even if no one else thought it was important, because I had told her it was important, and she believed me. She had signed it, "Your student forever, Margaret." I wept reading that letter, not just for Margaret but for all the children like her, the ones who slip through cracks and disappear from view, the ones whose potential might be nurtured or might be lost depending on whether someone notices them in time. I had noticed Margaret, but I hadn't been able to follow her beyond my classroom, hadn't been able to protect her from whatever difficulties had followed. But apparently I had given her something that lasted. Apparently the art supplies and encouragement had been enough to plant a seed that grew into something beautiful and valuable. The thought was both humbling and overwhelming. Jonathan Castillo arrived the next day carrying a leather portfolio and a small wrapped package. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes and the sort of gentle manner that probably served him well in his profession. Dealing with grieving families and complicated inheritances required a special kind of sensitivity. "Mrs. Richardson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Miss Holloway spoke of you often in her later years." She did? The idea that Margaret had remembered me, that she had talked about me to other people, felt both wonderful and strange. "Oh yes. She credited you with changing the entire trajectory of her life. May I sit down? There's quite a bit to go over." I led him to my living room, clearing space on the coffee table for his papers. He opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick envelope with my name written across it in unfamiliar handwriting. "This is the letter Ms. Holloway wrote for you. I'd recommend reading it first, as it will provide context for the legal documents." My hands shook slightly as I opened the envelope. The letter was written on heavy cream-colored paper in the same careful script I remembered from Margaret's childhood, though more mature and confident now. "Dear Mrs. Richardson," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have passed away, and Jonathan has successfully found you. I hope this letter finds you well and happy, surrounded by the love you deserve." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I had to stop reading and compose myself before continuing. "I have thought about you every day for 45 years. That may sound like an exaggeration, but it isn't. Every single day I have carried with me something you gave me in that third-grade classroom, and I want you to know what it was." I paused again, overwhelmed by the idea that anything I had done in that classroom had resonated for so long. "You saw me when no one else did. I don't just mean that you noticed I was struggling, although you did. I mean that you saw who I could become before I had any idea myself. When you gave me those art supplies and told me I was talented, you weren't just being kind. You were giving me permission to believe in my own potential." The letter went on to describe Margaret's life after leaving my classroom. The moves, the instability, the string of schools where she felt invisible and unimportant. But through it all, she had kept drawing, kept creating, because a teacher named Mrs. Richardson had told her it mattered. In high school, an art teacher had noticed her work and helped her apply for scholarships. She had gone to art school, struggled financially but persevered, eventually building a career as a painter whose work focused on childhood and memory. Her paintings had been exhibited in galleries across the country, and several museums had acquired pieces for their permanent collections. But success isn't why I'm writing this letter. The letter continued. I'm writing because I want you to know that everything good in my life grew from the seed you planted when you told a frightened, hungry little girl that she was smart and talented and worthy of attention. You saved me, Mrs. Richardson, in the most literal sense of that word. The letter described how Margaret had tried to find me over the years, but my married name had made me difficult to locate through internet searches. She had hired investigators, but by the time they found me, she was already seriously ill and too weak to make contact. Instead, she had chosen to express her gratitude through her will. I never married or had children of my own, the letter explained. My art was my legacy, and my art began with you. It seems fitting that you should be the one to benefit from what we created together. Mr. Castillo waited patiently while I finished reading, occasionally offering a tissue from a packet he kept in his jacket pocket. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with the expression of someone who had witnessed this scene many times but was still moved by it. She left you $500,000, he said quietly, and 3 of her paintings, specifically the ones she felt best represented the childhood memories that inspired her work. $500,000. The number seemed to float in the air between us. Impossible to grasp. I had never had that much money in my entire life, had never imagined having that much money. I can't, I whispered. I can't accept this. Mrs. Richardson, with respect, you don't have a choice. This is Miss Holloway's final wish. She was very specific about her intentions. He showed me the legal documents, the official papers that would transfer the money to an account in my name. All I had to do was sign, and my financial security would be guaranteed for the rest of my life. I would never have to worry about rent or medical bills or whether I could afford groceries. I would never have to depend on anyone else for survival. The irony was not lost on me. In the same week that my daughter had called me a burden, a former student had given me the means to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone again. But beyond the money, what moved me most was the letter itself. The knowledge that something I had done in the course of my ordinary workday had rippled out into the world in ways I never could have imagined. I had been a good teacher, I thought, but not an exceptional one. I had cared about my students, but so had most of my colleagues. What I had given Margaret felt so small in comparison to what she had accomplished with it. There's one more thing, Mr. Castillo said, reaching for the wrapped package. She wanted you to have this. Inside the wrapping was a small framed painting, no larger than a book. It showed a classroom from a child's perspective, with oversized desks and a tall figure that was unmistakably a teacher. The teacher was bending down to help a small girl with dark hair, and both figures were surrounded by warm, golden light that made the scene feel like a memory preserved in amber. In the bottom corner, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a tiny signature. For Mrs. R., who taught me to see. Love, M. I held the painting and cried for Margaret, for the little girl she had been and the woman she had become, for the 45 years of life between my classroom and her death, for all the students I had taught and wondered about and never heard from again. I cried for the randomness of it all, the way lives intersect and separate and sometimes circle back in ways that feel like miracles. When I finally composed myself enough to sign the papers, Mr. Castillo shook my hand and congratulated me on what he called a beautiful tribute to the power of teaching. He left me with copies of all the documents and a business card for the bank where the money would be deposited. After he left, I sat in my living room holding Margaret's painting and trying to process what had just happened. $500,000. Financial independence. Freedom from worry about money for the first time in my adult life. And then I thought about Jessica. My daughter, who had called me a burden while struggling with financial problems, she was too proud to discuss honestly. My daughter, who had resented my help while secretly needing it desperately. My daughter, who had no idea that the mother she had publicly humiliated was now in a position to solve all her problems with a single check. The power dynamic between us had shifted so dramatically that I felt dizzy contemplating it. A week ago, I had been the supplicant in our relationship, grateful for whatever attention she chose to give me, careful not to ask for too much or expect too little. Now I was the one with options, with resources, with the ability to say yes or no to her requests based on my own judgment rather than my desperation. But with that power came a terrible responsibility. What kind of person did I want to be? What kind of mother? Margaret's generosity had given me the freedom to choose my response to Jessica's cruelty, rather than simply reacting from a place of hurt and powerlessness. I could use the money to rescue Jessica from her financial problems, proving my love through the same pattern of giving that had defined our relationship for years. I could play the martyr, the endlessly forgiving mother who absorbed all wounds and asked nothing in return. Or I could use this unexpected windfall as an opportunity to reset our relationship entirely, to demand the respect and consideration I had never required before because I had never been in a position to require it. The decision felt enormous, with implications that would ripple through both our lives for years to come. But for the first time since Jessica's cruel post had shattered my understanding of our relationship, I felt like I had choices instead of just reactions. That evening, I called Elena upstairs and invited her down for dinner. I hadn't told anyone about Margaret's bequest. The news felt too new, too fragile to share widely. But I wanted company, wanted to sit across from someone who valued my presence instead of resenting it. Elena came down with a bottle of wine and a container of homemade flan, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there. We cooked together, something simple but satisfying, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't since Robert died. Elena had a gift for making ordinary moments feel festive, for turning a quiet dinner into a celebration of life itself. "You look different tonight, Mija," she said as we sat down to eat. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like something has shifted." "The universe has a way of correcting imbalances," Elena said with the wisdom of someone who had lived through more changes than most people could imagine. "Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning." I thought about Margaret's letter, about the ripples that had started in my third-grade classroom and somehow circled back to me 4 decades later. About Jessica's post, which had felt like an ending but might actually be the catalyst for something better. About the choices that lay ahead of me, and the freedom I now had to make them based on my own values rather than my fears. "Elena," I said, "if someone you loved hurt you publicly, humiliated you in front of many people, what would you do?" She considered the question seriously, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. "That would depend," she said finally, "on whether they were capable of learning from consequences or just capable of making excuses for their behavior. And if you weren't sure which one they were, then I would create a situation where they had to choose," she said simply. "Some people need to lose something before they understand its value. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the results of their own choices." After Elena left, I sat at my computer and did something I had never done before. I researched my daughter's financial situation with the thoroughness of a private investigator. Property records, court filings, business registrations, all the public information that reveals the gap between the life someone appears to be living and the life they actually are. What I found was both worse and more understandable than I had expected. Jessica and Marcus were not just struggling, they were on the verge of complete financial collapse. The townhouse they had purchased with my help was now in foreclosure proceedings. They had defaulted on their mortgage 3 months ago, and the bank had begun the legal process of reclaiming the property. The irony was breathtaking. While Jessica had been posting about my worthlessness as a mother, she had been losing the home I had helped her buy. While she had been complaining about my emotional neediness, she had been facing the loss of everything she had worked to achieve. And she hadn't told me. She had chosen to turn me into a public laughingstock rather than admit she needed help again. Her pride had been more important than her home, her image more valuable than our relationship. But I also understood, with the clarity that comes from distance and perspective, that Jessica's silence hadn't been entirely about pride. It had been about shame, the crushing, paralyzing shame of having to admit that the independence she had declared so fiercely was an illusion, that the adult life she had built was actually a house of cards that had fallen at the first strong wind. She had been angry at me not because I was truly burdensome, but because my presence reminded her of her own inadequacy. Every time I helped her, I highlighted her inability to help herself. Every time I offered support, I demonstrated her need for support she felt she shouldn't require. So she had lashed out, turning the person most likely to help her into the enemy, sabotaging the relationship that could have saved her. It was self-destructive behavior at its most pure, the kind of emotional logic that makes perfect sense from the inside and looks completely insane from the outside. But understanding Jessica's motivations didn't absolve her of responsibility for her choices. If anything, it made her behavior more inexcusable, because it revealed the calculation behind what had seemed like impulse. She had chosen cruelty over honesty, image over integrity, the approval of strangers over the love of family. Now she was facing the consequences of those choices, and I was facing the decision of whether to rescue her from them. I looked at Margaret's painting, at the image of a teacher bending down to help a struggling child, and I thought about the difference between helping someone learn and helping someone avoid the consequences of their own behavior. I had given Margaret art supplies and encouragement, but I hadn't done her homework for her or made excuses for her failures. I had supported her potential while expecting her to develop it herself. Maybe it was time to apply the same principles to motherhood that I had applied to teaching. Maybe the most loving thing I could do for Jessica was to let her fail completely, to let her lose everything she had gained through my sacrifice, so she could rebuild from a foundation of honesty instead of entitlement. The idea was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. For the first time in my life as a mother, I had the luxury of choosing my response based on wisdom rather than desperation. Margaret's gift had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me options. Tomorrow I would decide what to do with them. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to my apartment instead of Jessica's townhouse. I stared at the official envelope with my name typed across the front, confusion giving way to understanding as I read the contents. The bank had been unable to serve the notice at Jessica's address. Apparently, she and Marcus had been avoiding the mail carrier, so they had tracked down my information as a cosigner on the original loan documents. Cosigner. The word jumped off the page like an accusation. I had no memory of signing any cosigner paperwork. But there it was in black and white, my signature on a document dated 18 months ago. Below my name was a liability amount that made my hands shake, $87,000, representing the difference between what Jessica owed on the mortgage and what the house was worth in the current market. I called the bank immediately, demanding an explanation from a customer service representative who sounded like she was reading from a script. Yes, I was listed as a guarantor on the loan. Yes, that made me legally responsible for the debt if the primary borrowers defaulted. Yes, the foreclosure proceedings would continue against all parties named on the documents. But I never agreed to be a cosigner, I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Ma'am, I'm looking at your signature right here. The documents were notarized and properly filed. If you believe there was fraud involved, you'll need to contact the police and file a report. Fraud. The word hung in the air after I ended the call. Ugly and impossible to ignore. Jessica had forged my signature on legal documents, making me financially responsible for a debt I had never agreed to assume. She had used my credit, my financial stability, as collateral for a loan she couldn't afford, and she had done it without my knowledge or consent. The betrayal was so complete, so breathtaking in its scope, that I couldn't process it all at once. This wasn't just about a cruel social media post anymore. This was about identity theft, forgery, a level of deception that went far beyond momentary cruelty into the realm of criminal behavior. I drove to Jessica's townhouse that afternoon, the foreclosure notice clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. The neighborhood looked different than I remembered, more rundown, with several houses displaying for sale signs and overgrown lawns that suggested their owners had given up on maintenance. The economic downturn had hit this area harder than I'd realized. Jessica's house stood out for all the wrong reasons. The lawn was brown and patchy, the mailbox overflowing with what looked like weeks of accumulated mail, and a bright yellow notice was taped to the front door. Even from the street, I could see the official seal that marked it as a legal document. I rang the doorbell 3 times before Jessica finally answered, looking haggard in a way that shocked me. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face was bare of makeup, and she was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that hung on her like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. "Mom, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk. I held up the foreclosure notice. About this. Her face went white. How did you get that? It was mailed to me. Because apparently, I'm a co-signer on your mortgage. Funny thing is, I don't remember signing any paperwork. She stepped back from the door, and I followed her inside without waiting for an invitation. The house was dark, with most of the curtains drawn, and it smelled like takeout food and unwashed laundry. Boxes were stacked in the hallway, some labeled donate, and others marked storage. Jessica, did you forge my signature on loan documents? She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I was going to tell you, that's not an answer. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I forged your signature. But Mom, we were desperate. The bank wouldn't approve the loan without a co-signer, and we knew you'd say yes if we asked, so you just committed fraud. The words came out harder than I intended. You stole my identity and made me responsible for a debt I never agreed to take on. It wasn't supposed to matter, Jessica's voice cracked. We were never supposed to default. We had steady income, good jobs, a plan for paying everything back. The co-signer thing was just a formality. A formality that's now going to cost me $87,000. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What are you talking about? I handed her the foreclosure notice, watching her face as she read the details of her financial destruction. When she reached the part about my liability as guarantor, she started crying. I didn't know, she sobbed. I didn't know it would be that much. When we signed the papers, the house was worth more than we owed. I thought if something went wrong, the sale would cover everything. But something did go wrong. And you never told me what you'd done, never gave me a chance to protect myself financially. I was ashamed. The words came out in a rush. Everything fell apart so fast. Marcus lost his job. Then I got demoted, and the mortgage payments became impossible. I kept thinking we could figure it out, that we could catch up somehow. I looked around the living room, taking in the evidence of a life being dismantled. Half the furniture was gone, leaving odd spaces where tables and lamps used to be. The walls were bare, with lighter rectangles showing where framed photos had hung. How long have you been living like this? 3 months. Since the first missed payment. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. We've been selling everything we can, trying to raise enough money to get current on the loan. But it's not enough. It's never enough. And instead of asking for help, you decided to post about what a burden I am. Fresh tears started flowing. I was angry. I was scared and angry, and I needed someone to blame. And you were just there, trying to help like always, and it made me feel like such a failure. So you made me the villain in your story. I made a terrible mistake. You made several terrible mistakes, I corrected. The post was just the most public one. She looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. Mom, I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you and lied to you and did things that were completely wrong. But we're family. You've always been there for me before. Before, you never committed fraud against me. It wasn't fraud exactly. I mean, I knew you'd help if I asked. But you didn't ask. You took. You stole my financial security and then mocked me publicly when I tried to give you emotional support. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her expression was different. Less desperate, more calculating. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I am sorry. That I'll never do anything like this again? I won't. That I'll pay you back? I will. Somehow. Eventually. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to understand that actions have consequences. That love doesn't mean automatic forgiveness. That being family doesn't give you the right to treat someone badly and expect them to absorb it without complaint. I understand that. Do you? Because 30 seconds ago you were telling me that forging my signature wasn't really fraud, because you knew I'd help if you asked. That doesn't sound like understanding to me. She was quiet again, and I could see her mind working, trying to find the right combination of words that would unlock my sympathy and open my wallet. Mom, What do you want me to do? I can't undo what I did. I can't go back and make different choices. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and hope you'll help me fix this mess. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, there is something you can do. I opened Facebook and navigated to Jessica's profile, scrolling until I found the post that had started this entire cascade of revelations. It was still there, now with over 100 likes and comments, a monument to public humiliation that had taken on a life of its own. Delete this, I said, handing her the phone. She looked at the screen and her face flushed. Mom, that's ancient history. Nobody even remembers it anymore. I remember it. And until it's gone, we have nothing to discuss. Deleting one post isn't going to fix everything that's wrong between us. No, but it's a start. It's an acknowledgement that what you did was wrong and that you're willing to take responsibility for your mistakes. Jessica stared at the phone for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Deleting the post would mean admitting she was wrong publicly, in front of all the people who had laughed and agreed with her assessment of me. It would mean sacrificing her pride for the possibility of my help. And, if I delete it, you'll help us save the house? If you delete it, I'll consider what comes next. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the sound of Marcus's car in the driveway interrupted whatever she was about to say. A moment later, he walked through the front door, stopping short when he saw me. Mrs. Richardson, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting you. Marcus had always been polite to me, but distant, treating me like a necessary inconvenience in his wife's life, rather than a valued family member. He was a tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair, and the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was always mentally 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation he was having. Hello, Marcus. Jessica and I were just discussing your financial situation. He shot a look at Jessica, who shrugged helplessly. She knows about the foreclosure. And the co-signer thing. Marcus's shoulders sagged. Right. Well, I guess that conversation was bound to happen eventually. Eventually? I raised an eyebrow. You were planning to tell me that you'd forged my signature on legal documents? We were going to tell you, Marcus said quickly. We just wanted to get back on our feet first, prove that everything worked out okay. But everything didn't work out okay. No, it really didn't. I looked between the two of them, these adults who had made such catastrophically bad decisions while trying to maintain the appearance of success. They reminded me of students who had cheated on a test. Not because they were inherently dishonest, but because they were too proud to admit they hadn't studied hard enough and too scared to face the consequences of their inadequate preparation. Marcus, I said, are you aware that your wife posted about me on social media, calling me a burden and making fun of my appearance? His face reddened. I saw the post. I told her it was a mistake. But you didn't ask her to take it down. I suggested she should, but... He looked at Jessica helplessly. She said it wasn't a big deal. Do you think it's a big deal now? Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I turned back to Jessica, who was still holding my phone with the post displayed on the screen. Well? She looked at Marcus, then back at me, and I could see the exact moment she realized that her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her finger moved across the screen and the post disappeared. There, she said, handing me back the phone. It's deleted. I checked to make sure the post was actually gone, not just hidden from my view. It was. The public record of my humiliation had been erased, though I knew the memory of it would linger in the minds of everyone who had seen it. Thank you, I said. That was the right thing to do. Jessica looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to follow through on the implied promise of help. But I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. The deleted post was a gesture, but it was only a gesture. The real question was whether Jessica and Marcus were capable of fundamental change or just tactical adjustments to their behavior. I need to think about what comes next, I said. This is a lot to process. Mom, we don't have time for you to think, Jessica said, desperation creeping back into her voice. The foreclosure sale is scheduled for next week. If we don't come up with the money to bring the loan current, we lose everything. You should have thought of that before you decided to commit fraud. Please, Marcus said quietly. We know we messed up. We know we handled everything wrong. but we're drowning here, and you're the only person who might be able to help us." I looked around the room again, taking in the boxes and empty spaces, the evidence of dreams being packed away piece by piece. Despite everything they had done, despite the lies and fraud and public humiliation, these were still people I loved. Jessica was still my daughter, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. Marcus was still the young man who had promised to love and protect her. But love and sympathy weren't the same thing as wisdom, and enabling their bad behavior in the name of family loyalty wasn't the same thing as helping them. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said, standing up to leave. "Mom, please." "Tomorrow, Jessica. I need time to think." I drove home feeling like I was carrying the weight of 3 lives in my hands. The power to save or destroy Jessica's future was mine now, and the responsibility was crushing. But for the first time in our relationship, I was making decisions based on choice rather than obligation, wisdom rather than desperation. That evening, I called Jonathan Castillo to discuss the logistics of accessing Margaret's bequest. The money was sitting in an account, waiting for me to claim it, but I wanted to understand my options before making any major decisions. "The funds are available immediately," he told me. "You can write checks against the account or arrange electronic transfers. There are no restrictions on how you use the money. And if I wanted to help someone else with their financial problems, that's entirely up to you. The money is yours to do with as you see fit." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and the foreclosure documents, working out the exact amount needed to save Jessica's house. $87,000 to clear the default and bring the loan current. Another $15,000 for legal fees and penalties. Just over $100,000 total, a fraction of what Margaret had left me. I could write a check tomorrow and solve Jessica's problems with the stroke of a pen. I could be the hero, the rescuing mother who swooped in at the last minute to save the day. I could restore the family dynamic that had defined our relationship for years, with me as the giver and Jessica as the grateful recipient. But I could also let the foreclosure proceed. I could allow Jessica and Marcus to face the full consequences of their choices, to lose the house and declare bankruptcy, and start over from nothing. I could teach them the lesson that actions have results, that fraud and cruelty and dishonesty carry a price that can't be negotiated away. The choice felt enormous, with implications that would ripple through all our lives for years to come. But it was my choice to make, and that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called Elena upstairs and asked if she could come down for coffee. When she arrived, I found myself telling her everything about Margaret's bequest, about Jessica's fraud, about the impossible decision I was facing. Elena listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions but offering no advice until I finished talking. Then she sat back in her chair and studied me with the penetrating gaze of someone who had seen enough of life to understand its complexities. "Mija," she said finally, "what does your heart tell you to do?" "My heart tells me to save her. She's my daughter. I love her." "And what does your head tell you?" "My head tells me that saving her won't actually help her, that if I bail her out of this mess, I'll just be enabling her to make the same mistakes again. So you know what you need to do. Do I?" Elena reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not choosing between helping your daughter and hurting her. You're choosing between 2 different ways of helping her. One feels good in the moment but doesn't last. The other feels terrible in the moment but creates the possibility for real change. What if she never forgives me? What if she does? What if this is the wake-up call she needs to become the person she's capable of being?" After Elena left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment and made the hardest decision of my life as a mother. I would not save Jessica's house. I would not rescue her from the consequences of fraud and deception and cruelty. I would love her enough to let her fail completely, so she could learn to succeed honestly. But I wouldn't leave her with nothing. I would give her something more valuable than money. I would give her the truth about what love actually requires. The next morning, I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for coffee at the diner near my apartment. She arrived looking hopeful and desperate in equal measure, probably assuming I was ready to write the check that would solve all her problems. "I've made my decision," I said after we ordered. "Thank you," she breathed. "Mom, I can't tell you how much this means. I'm not going to save your house." The hope died in her eyes so quickly that I almost changed my mind. "What? I'm not going to pay off your mortgage or cover your legal fees or bail you out of this situation." "But you said..." I said I would consider what comes next. And I have. What comes next is you and Marcus facing the consequences of your choices. Jessica stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Mom, we'll lose everything. Yes, you will. We'll have to declare bankruptcy. Our credit will be ruined. We might have to move in with his parents. That's possible. You could prevent all of that. You have the money now, I know you do. That lawyer who came to see you wasn't delivering bad news. No, he wasn't. I inherited a substantial amount of money from a former student who wanted to thank me for believing in her potential. Then why won't you help us? Because helping you avoid consequences isn't the same thing as helping you learn and grow. Because bailing you out of this mess won't address the underlying problems that created it. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them fall. Jessica's face was flushed with anger and disbelief. So you're just going to sit there with your inheritance and watch us lose our home? I'm going to sit here with my inheritance and watch you learn that actions have consequences. That love doesn't mean automatic rescue. That being an adult means taking responsibility for your mistakes instead of expecting other people to fix them. This is about the Facebook post, isn't it? You're punishing me because I hurt your feelings. This is about the pattern of behavior that the Facebook post represented. The fraud, the deception, the expectation that I'll always be available to clean up your messes. The post was just the most visible symptom of a much deeper problem. What problem? Quote, "You don't respect me, Jessica. You see me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be valued. And I've enabled that by always being available, always saying yes, always putting your needs ahead of my own dignity." That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my life? My health? My happiness? When was the last time you called just to talk, not because you needed something? Jessica opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the answer was never. I love you, I continued, but I'm done being treated like an ATM with feelings. I'm done being someone you turn to only when you need money or someone to blame for your problems. So what, we're just done? You're cutting me off? I'm giving you space to grow up. I'm giving you the opportunity to build a life based on honesty instead of deception, responsibility instead of entitlement. And what if I can't? What if we really do lose everything? Then you'll start over. You'll rebuild from a foundation of truth instead of lies. And maybe, eventually, you'll understand that the most valuable thing I ever gave you wasn't money. It was the belief that you were capable of more than you were showing me. Jessica was crying now, but they weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen so many times before. These were tears of genuine grief, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've lost something they can never get back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, and someday, when you've figured out how to be the person you're capable of being, we'll have a different conversation. But that day isn't today. I stood up to leave, but Jessica caught my arm. Mom, wait, what if I could prove to you that I've changed? What if I could show you that I'm ready to be different? How? I don't know yet, but give me a chance. Give me time to figure it out. I looked down at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and failed, in ways I was only beginning to understand. She looked so young in that moment, so lost and scared and desperate for another chance. Time is the one thing I can't give you right now, I said gently. The foreclosure is next week. But after that, when the dust settles and you've had a chance to process what comes next, we can talk about rebuilding our relationship on better terms. Better terms? Honest terms. Respectful terms. Terms that require you to value me as a person instead of just seeing me as a solution to your problems. I left Jessica sitting in that diner, crying into her coffee cup, and I felt like I was leaving part of my heart behind. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Self-respect. For the first time in our relationship, I had chosen my own dignity over her comfort, and it felt both terrible and necessary. The foreclosure sale happened on schedule the following Tuesday. I didn't attend, but I saw the listing online afterward. Townhouse sold at public auction. Jessica and Marcus had 7 days to vacate the property. I heard nothing from either of them during that week, and I forced myself not to reach out. This was their crisis to navigate, their lesson to learn. My role was to step back and let them discover what they were capable of when they couldn't rely on me to rescue them. On the 8th day, Jessica called. "We're out," she said simply. "We moved in with Marcus's parents in Riverside. It's humbling." "How are you doing?" "Terrible, embarrassed, ashamed, but also relieved, I guess. The pressure is gone. We don't have to pretend anymore." "What's next?" "We're both looking for jobs. Real jobs that pay enough to cover real expenses. We're going to live simply and save money and try to rebuild our credit. It's going to take years." "I'm sorry it came to this." "No, you're not, and you shouldn't be. You were right, Mom, about everything. I needed to lose it all to understand what really mattered." We talked for another few minutes, carefully and politely, like strangers learning to trust each other. There was no mention of my inheritance, no requests for help, no assumptions about what I owed her. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the different ways to love someone. The easy way, which felt good in the moment but didn't last. And the hard way, which felt terrible in the moment but created the possibility for real change. I had chosen the hard way, and only time would tell if it was the right choice. But for the first time in my life as a mother, I felt like I had acted from wisdom instead of fear, strength instead of desperation. Margaret's gift had given me more than financial security. It had given me the freedom to love my daughter better, even when that love looked like saying no. 6 months passed before Jessica called again. 6 months of silence that felt like a held breath, a space between the old relationship and whatever would come next. During that time, I established routines that had nothing to do with being someone's mother or grandmother in waiting. I volunteered at 3 different organizations, took a pottery class, and traveled to places I'd always wanted to see but never had the confidence or resources to visit alone. Margaret's inheritance had given me more than financial freedom. It had given me permission to live for myself. For the first time since Robert's death, I woke up each morning with plans that excited me rather than obligations that exhausted me. I bought books without checking the price, chose restaurants based on what I wanted to eat rather than what I could afford, and said yes to invitations without calculating the cost. But underneath the newfound independence, I carried a constant awareness of Jessica's absence. Not the desperate longing I'd felt during the first few weeks, but something more complex. A mixture of sadness and relief, love and disappointment, hope and acceptance. I missed my daughter, but I didn't miss the anxiety that had accompanied our relationship for so many years. When her name appeared on my phone that Tuesday evening in March, I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded different, quieter, less demanding, with none of the entitled edge that had characterized our conversations for years. "Hello, Jessica, how are you?" "I'm different. Better, I think. Can we talk? In person, I mean." "Of course. When would be good for you?" "Would Saturday afternoon work? There's a coffee shop in downtown that's midway between us. Neutral territory." The phrase made me smile despite myself. Neutral territory suggested she understood that our relationship needed to be rebuilt from scratch, with new boundaries and different expectations. "Text me the address. I'll be there." Saturday came with the kind of spring weather that makes everything feel possible. Warm sunshine, clear skies, the smell of blooming trees carrying on a gentle breeze. I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a table by the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk while I waited. Jessica appeared precisely on time, walking with a purposefulness I hadn't seen in years. She looked healthier than she had during our last meeting, with color in her cheeks and a steadiness in her posture that suggested she'd found some kind of peace with her circumstances. "Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "thank you for coming. Thank you for asking instead of demanding." She winced slightly. "I deserved that. You deserve honesty, we both do." She ordered coffee and a sandwich, eating with the appetite of someone who had learned not to take meals for granted. We made small talk for a few minutes. The weather, the neighborhood, Safe topics that allowed us to find our footing with each other. I wanted to tell you about my life now, Jessica said eventually. About what's happened since we last talked. I'd like to hear that. Marcus and I both found jobs within 2 weeks of moving in with his parents. Nothing glamorous. I'm working customer service for an insurance company. He's doing data entry for a logistics firm. But they're honest jobs with steady paychecks and benefits. She paused to sip her coffee, organizing her thoughts before continuing. Living with his parents has been educational. They're good people, but they have rules and expectations. No lying around feeling sorry for ourselves. No spending money we don't have. No drama or blame games. It was humbling at first, but also clarifying. Clarifying how? It made me realize how entitled I'd become. How much I'd been living in a fantasy world where my problems were always someone else's fault, and my needs were always more important than anyone else's. I watched her face as she spoke, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized so many of our conversations. But there was a directness to her manner now, a willingness to be uncomfortable with her own truths, that felt genuinely different. We've been saving money, she continued. Living on Marcus's salary and banking mine entirely. We'll have enough for a security deposit on our own place by the end of the summer. That's wonderful. We're also paying back debts, including the money we owe you. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside was a check for $500 and a handwritten payment schedule. I know it's not much compared to what we took from you, but it's what we can afford right now. The schedule shows how we plan to pay back every penny over the next 4 years. I stared at the check, stunned not by the amount but by the gesture itself. In all the years I'd given Jessica money, she had never once offered to pay any of it back. The assumption had always been that my resources belonged to her, that my role was to give and hers was to receive. Jessica, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I have to because it's the right thing to do. And I have to because I want to prove to myself that I can be better than I was. And what about us? Our relationship? She was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the people passing by. I miss you, she said finally. I miss having a mother. But I don't miss the person I was when we were talking regularly. I don't miss the way I treated you or the way I felt about myself when I was constantly taking from you. I miss you too. The thing is, I'm not sure I know how to be your daughter without being your burden. For so long, our relationship was about what you could do for me, what problems you could solve, what needs you could meet. I don't know how to relate to you as an equal. We could learn together. Would you want to? I mean, really want to? Not just feel obligated to because I'm family? The question hung between us, honest and vulnerable in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. This was what I'd been hoping for without quite knowing how to ask for it. A daughter who saw me as a person rather than a resource, who valued our relationship enough to examine her own behavior honestly. I would love to learn how to be your mother in a way that honors both of us, I said. I've been thinking about what that might look like. What it would mean to have a relationship based on mutual respect instead of one-sided need. What have you concluded? That it would probably start with me getting to know you as a person instead of just thinking of you as mom. I realized the other day that I don't actually know very much about your life, your interests, your dreams, what makes you happy or worried or excited. She was right. Our conversations had always centered on her experiences, her problems, her feelings. I had become so accustomed to being the listener, the advisor, the problem solver, that I'd forgotten I was also a person with my own inner life worth sharing. I'd like that, I said. I'd like for you to know me better. Would you be willing to start slowly? Maybe we could meet like this once a month, just to talk. No agenda, no crisis to solve, just conversation between two adults who happen to be related. Once a month sounds perfect. And Mom, I want you to know that I've been following your social media since I created that awful post. I've seen the pictures from your travels, your volunteer work, the pottery class. You look happy. Really, genuinely happy. I am happy. Good. You deserve to be happy. You deserved it all along, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We talked for another hour, carefully building the foundation for something new. Jessica told me about the books she'd been reading, the therapy she'd started, the ways she was learning to manage her anxiety without making it everyone else's problem. I told her about my volunteer work with adult literacy students, the pottery pieces I was planning to give as gifts, the trip to Ireland I was planning for the fall. It felt strange and wonderful to have a conversation with my daughter that wasn't about crisis management or emotional labor. For the first time in years, we were just two women talking, sharing pieces of ourselves without agenda or expectation. When we finally stood to leave, Jessica hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more thing I need to say. About that Facebook post, about the way I humiliated you publicly. Jessica, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I need you to know that I understand now what I really did. It wasn't just a moment of frustration or bad judgment. I weaponized your love for me. I took the most vulnerable version of yourself, the mother who would do anything for her child, and I made it into entertainment for strangers." Her voice was thick with emotion now, but she continued. "That wasn't just cruel, it was evil. And the fact that I did it to someone who had literally given me everything she had makes it unforgivable. It's not unforgivable. It should be. The fact that you're even willing to sit here with me to give me another chance says everything about your character and nothing about what I deserved. We all deserve the chance to become better than we've been. Maybe, but I want you to know that I understand the gift you're giving me. The gift of your time, your attention, your willingness to believe I can change. I don't take it lightly." As we walked out of the coffee shop together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for my relationship with my daughter. Not the desperate hope I'd carried for so long, the kind that required me to ignore red flags and accept crumbs. This was something steadier, based on evidence rather than wishful thinking. Jessica was different. Not perfect, not completely healed, but genuinely committed to growth in a way that felt sustainable. She was asking for a relationship based on equality, rather than dependence, respect, rather than entitlement. It was everything I'd wanted, but never known how to request. "Same time next month?" she asked as we reached our cars. "I'll mark my calendar." "Mom, I love you. The real you, not just the version of you that fixes my problems. I love you too, sweetheart. All of you, including the parts that are still learning and growing." Driving home, I thought about the different kinds of courage required for different seasons of life. The courage to give everything when you're young and full of hope. The courage to set boundaries when you're older and wiser. The courage to forgive without forgetting, to love without enabling, to hope without guaranteeing the outcome. I had used Margaret's gift to save myself from a relationship that was slowly destroying both Jessica and me. By refusing to rescue her from the consequences of her choices, I had forced her to discover what she was capable of when she couldn't rely on anyone else to solve her problems. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done as a mother, but it had also been the most loving. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to fail completely, so they can learn to succeed honestly. 3 weeks later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small watercolor painting, a simple landscape with a house, a garden, and 2 figures sitting on a porch. The style was amateur but earnest, clearly painted by someone who was learning the craft rather than mastering it. On the back was a note in Jessica's handwriting. "I started taking art classes. Thought you might like to see what I'm working on. Love, your daughter who's still figuring things out." I hung the painting in my kitchen, next to Margaret's more sophisticated work. The contrast was striking, one painted by a master at the end of her career, the other by a beginner at the start of hers. But they both represented the same thing: the power of encouragement, the importance of believing in someone's potential, even when they can't see it themselves. Margaret had painted her gratitude for a teacher who saw her worth when she was young and lost. Jessica was painting her hope for a mother who was willing to see her worth, even after she'd lost her way. Both paintings had grown from seeds planted in classrooms and living rooms, in moments when someone chose to invest in another person's future rather than simply react to their present circumstances. They were reminders that love isn't just about feeling, it's about action, about choice, about the daily decision to believe in someone's capacity for growth. Over the next few months, Jessica and I established a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. We met monthly for coffee or lunch, sometimes talking for hours about books we'd read or places we wanted to visit. We texted occasionally, but not about crises or problems, just the small connections that keep people in each other's lives. She sent me pictures of the apartment she and Marcus rented in August, a modest one-bedroom place with good light and a small balcony where she was attempting to grow herbs. I sent her photos from my trip to Ireland, along with a postcard from every city I visited. In October, she called to tell me she'd been promoted at work, a small advancement that came with additional responsibilities and a modest raise. We celebrated over dinner at a restaurant that was neither too expensive nor too cheap, splitting the check because that's what equals do. In November, I attended a gallery showing of her art class's work. Jessica's pieces were displayed alongside those of her classmates, simple but heartfelt expressions of someone learning to see the world through new eyes. I bought 3 of her paintings, not because I felt obligated to support her, but because I genuinely liked them. In December, she invited me to Christmas dinner with Marcus's family. It was the first holiday invitation I'd received from her in years, and the first time I'd been included as a guest rather than expected to provide or organize the celebration. The dinner was lovely, warm and chaotic in the way family gatherings should be, with too much food and overlapping conversations and children running between the adults. I brought a bottle of wine and a dessert I'd learned to make in one of my cooking classes, contributing to the meal without being responsible for it. After dinner, Jessica and I walked around the neighborhood, looking at Christmas lights and talking about the year that was ending. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," she said as we paused in front of a house decorated with thousands of tiny white lights. "What about it?" "About the difference between forgiving someone and trusting them again. I used to think they were the same thing, that if you really forgave someone, you had to go back to treating them exactly the way you did before they hurt you. And now? Now I think forgiveness is about letting go of anger and resentment, but trust has to be rebuilt through actions over time. You can forgive someone immediately, but trusting them again is a process." "That sounds very wise. I'm hoping you'll forgive me for what I did, if you haven't already, but I also understand that trusting me again will take time, and that it's my responsibility to prove I've earned it." "I forgave you months ago," I said, "but you're right about trust. That's something we'll build together, one conversation at a time." "I'm okay with that. I'm okay with earning my way back into your life, instead of just expecting to be there." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights twinkle against the dark sky. The air was cold, but not bitter, crisp in the way that makes you grateful for warm clothes and the promise of hot coffee waiting at home. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The money you inherited, what are you doing with it?" The question surprised me, not because she asked, but because she'd waited so long to bring it up. For months, we'd been building a relationship that had nothing to do with money or financial support, and I'd wondered if she was curious about my newfound resources. "I'm using it to live well," I said, "to travel, to take classes, to support causes I care about. I'm also setting aside money for my future care, so I'll never have to depend on anyone else for my basic needs." "That sounds perfect. Why do you ask?" "Because I wanted you to know that I'm glad you have it. Glad you have the freedom to live the life you want instead of constantly worrying about money. You deserve that security." "Thank you. That means a lot." "I also wanted you to know that I don't expect any of it. Not now, not ever. Whatever relationship we build going forward, I want it to be separate from any financial considerations." "I appreciate you saying that." "I mean it. I don't want there to ever be a question about why I'm spending time with you, or why I call, or why I invite you to things. I want our relationship to be valuable in itself, not because of what you might give me." As we walked back toward the house, I thought about how far we'd both come. A year ago, Jessica had seen me as a burden and a resource, someone whose worth was measured by my utility. Now she was actively working to ensure that money never became a factor in our relationship again. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had required Jessica to lose everything she thought she wanted, to rebuild her life from scratch, to learn the difference between surviving and thriving. It had required me to choose my own dignity over her comfort, to love her enough to let her fail, to believe in her capacity for growth even when she couldn't see it herself. Most importantly, it had required both of us to acknowledge that love without boundaries isn't actually love at all. It's enablement disguised as affection. Real love sometimes requires saying no. Real love sometimes requires letting someone face the consequences of their choices. Real love sometimes looks like the absence of rescue. Standing in Marcus's parents' living room at the end of that evening, watching Jessica help clear the dinner dishes without being asked, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper than happiness. We had done the work. We had torn down a dysfunctional relationship and built something healthier in its place. It wasn't the same relationship we'd had before. It was better, more honest, more equal, more sustainable. It was a relationship between two adults who chose to be in each other's lives rather than two people bound together by obligation and resentment. As I drove home that night, I thought about Margaret's letter, about her gratitude for a teacher who had seen her potential when she was young and lost. I wondered if someday Jessica would look back on this year as the time when her mother loved her enough to let her discover who she really was. But even if she didn't, even if our relationship didn't continue to improve, I knew I had done the right thing. I had chosen wisdom over fear, self-respect over martyrdom, tough love over easy enabling. I had modeled for my daughter what it looked like to value yourself enough to demand better treatment. In January, Jessica called with news that she and Marcus were expecting their first child. The pregnancy was early, she was nervous, and she wanted to share the information with me before telling anyone else. Congratulations, I said, and meant it completely. How are you feeling about it? Terrified and excited in equal measure. We're not exactly in the ideal financial position for a baby, but we're stable and employed and we have family support if we need it. You'll be wonderful parents. I hope so. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of mother I want to be, about the mistakes I want to avoid. What have you concluded? That I want to raise a child who sees me as a person, not just as a source of comfort or solutions. I want to teach them that love includes respect, that family relationships require effort from everyone involved, that taking care of each other is a privilege, not an obligation. Those are beautiful goals. I learned them from watching You Refuse to Enable My Bad Behavior. From seeing what it looked like when someone loved me enough to let me face the consequences of my choices. We talked for a few more minutes about doctor's appointments and due dates and the small excitements of early pregnancy. When we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and thought about becoming a grandmother, about the opportunity to love a new person without the complicated history that Jessica and I carried. But more than that, I thought about the gift Jessica was giving her unborn child, the gift of a mother who had learned the difference between love and enablement, who understood that healthy relationships require boundaries and mutual respect. Margaret's inheritance had given me the financial freedom to make hard choices about my relationship with Jessica. But the real inheritance, the one that would last for generations, was the knowledge that love sometimes requires saying no, that respect must be earned and maintained, that the deepest kindness is often the kind that feels cruel in the moment but creates the possibility for authentic connection later. I looked at the two paintings hanging in my kitchen, Margaret's sophisticated landscape and Jessica's beginner's attempt at capturing light and shadow. Both represented growth, potential realized through patient encouragement, and high expectations. In the margin of my calendar, I wrote the baby's due date and smiled. Another chance to love well, to see clearly, to believe in someone's potential while respecting their autonomy. Another opportunity to plant seeds that might grow into something beautiful, given enough time and the right conditions. Outside my window, the first snow of the new year was beginning to fall, covering the world in clean white silence. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into Robert's old chair, content with the choices I'd made and curious about what would grow from them. I had learned that the most powerful word in any relationship is no, and that saying it with love is the greatest gift you can give someone who has forgotten their own worth. I had learned that rescue isn't the same as help, that comfort isn't the same as kindness, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to demand better, to choose dignity over dependence, to love someone enough to let them discover who they really are when they can't rely on anyone else to solve their problems. The snow continued to fall, and I sat in my warm kitchen, surrounded by evidence of love given and received, growth attempted and achieved, mistakes made and lessons learned. It had been a year of endings and beginnings, of loss and discovery, of learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let someone find their own way. The baby arrived on a humid Tuesday in August, 3 weeks early, and with enough drama to keep the entire maternity ward on their toes. Jessica called me at 6 in the morning, her voice tight with pain and excitement. "Mom, it's happening. We're at the hospital." I was dressed and in my car within 10 minutes, driving through the empty streets with my heart hammering against my ribs. This was my first grandchild, the first baby in our family since Jessica herself, and I felt the weight of the moment in ways I hadn't expected. At the hospital, I found Marcus pacing in the waiting room, his hair sticking up in all directions, and his shirt buttoned wrong. He looked like a man who had been awakened by forces beyond his control and was still trying to catch up with reality. "How is she?" I asked. "Scared, excited, in a lot of pain. The doctor says everything looks normal, but labor is moving fast." "And how are you?" He laughed shakily. "Terrified. I keep thinking about all the ways I could mess this up, all the things I don't know about being a father." "That's exactly how every good parent feels," I told him. "The fact that you're worried means you care enough to try your best." 4 hours later, Eleanor Grace arrived, 6 pounds, 2 ounces of indignant humanity, with Jessica's dark hair and Marcus's stubborn chin. She entered the world with her fists clenched and her voice raised in protest, as if she had opinions about the entire process and wasn't shy about sharing them. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt something shift inside my chest, a recognition so profound it took my breath away. This tiny person was completely new and yet somehow familiar, carrying traces of Jessica's infant face and Robert's determined jawline, genetics expressing themselves across generations in ways that felt like miracles. "Hello, Eleanor," I whispered, and she opened her eyes to stare at me with the solemn intensity of someone taking inventory of her new surroundings. Jessica watched from her hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, her hair dark with sweat, and her face soft with the particular beauty that comes after surviving something extraordinary. "What do you think, Mom? Does she look like she belongs in our family?" "She looks perfect," I said, and meant it completely. Over the next few days, I watched Jessica and Marcus navigate the overwhelming transition into parenthood. They were tender with each other in ways I hadn't seen before, patient with their own learning curve, willing to ask for help without assuming it would be automatically provided. When Eleanor cried for hours despite their best efforts to comfort her, Jessica called her pediatrician instead of expecting me to have all the answers. When they ran out of diapers at 2 in the morning, Marcus drove to the 24-hour pharmacy instead of asking me to solve the problem. They were functioning as a unit, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood, without defaulting to their old pattern of crisis management. It was beautiful to witness, but it was also a reminder of how different our relationship had become. I was Eleanor's grandmother, not her primary caregiver. I was Jessica's mother, not her emergency response team. The boundaries we had established over the past year held firm even in the emotional intensity of bringing a new life into the world. "Would you like to stay with us for a few days?" Jessica asked as I prepared to leave the hospital. "To help with Eleanor while we get our bearings?" The offer was genuine, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the awareness that our old dynamic might reassert itself if we weren't careful. "I think you two need time to figure out your own rhythm," I said. "But I'd love to come by in a few days, once you've settled in at home." Relief flickered across her face, quickly followed by gratitude. "Thank you. For understanding, I mean. For not making me feel guilty about wanting space. Eleanor is lucky to have parents who know what they need and aren't afraid to ask for it." When I did visit the following week, I came as a guest rather than a savior. I brought dinner from Jessica's favorite restaurant and stayed for exactly 2 hours, holding Eleanor while Jessica showered and Marcus caught up on sleep. When Eleanor fussed, I handed her back to Jessica instead of assuming I knew better how to comfort her. It was a different kind of helping than I had offered in the past. Respectful, temporary, focused on supporting their autonomy rather than demonstrating my own necessity. And it felt better, cleaner, more sustainable than the desperate interventions that had characterized my relationship with Jessica for so many years. As autumn settled over the city, I established a new routine that included weekly visits with Eleanor, but maintained the independence I had worked so hard to achieve. Tuesdays became grandma days, 2 hours of Eleanor time while Jessica ran errands or simply enjoyed a quiet coffee alone. During these visits, I told Eleanor stories about her family history, about her grandfather Robert and the garden he had loved, about the students I had taught and the lessons they had learned. She was too young to understand the words, but she seemed to enjoy the rhythm of conversation, the back and forth of human connection. "She's going to be a reader," I told Jessica one Tuesday as Eleanor grabbed for the board book I was showing her. "How can you tell?" "The way she focuses on the pages, like she's trying to decode the mysteries hidden in the pictures. I've seen that look in 1,000 children's faces over the years." Jessica smiled. "I hope she loves books the way you do. I hope she loves learning." "She will if you model curiosity and respect for knowledge. Children learn more from what they see than from what they're told." Speaking of learning, I've been thinking about going back to school. The statement surprised me, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented such a dramatic shift from the Jessica I had known for most of her adult life. What kind of school? Community college to start. Maybe eventually a 4-year degree. I never finished college the first time because I was too focused on getting married and starting my adult life. But now I think I might want to become a teacher. A teacher? Elementary school, like you were. I've been thinking about what Eleanor will learn from watching me, about what kind of example I want to set for her. I want her to see that it's never too late to grow, that education is valuable for its own sake, not just as a means to an end. I felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with my own achievements, and everything to do with Jessica's growing wisdom. The woman who had once viewed my teaching career as quaint and old-fashioned was now considering following in my footsteps. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "What subjects are you thinking about?" "Child development, educational psychology, maybe some art classes to support creative learning. I want to understand how children's minds work, how to create environments where they feel safe enough to take intellectual risks." "And Marcus supports this plan?" "He's the one who suggested it. He said watching me with Eleanor made him realize I have natural teaching instincts, that I should explore them in a formal setting." We talked for another hour about course catalogs and scheduling challenges, about the financial sacrifices that would be required, and the long-term benefits of pursuing meaningful work. Jessica's enthusiasm was infectious, but it was tempered by realism in a way that felt mature and sustainable. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the circularity of influence, the way love and encouragement can ripple through generations in unexpected patterns. Margaret's gratitude had given me the resources to make hard choices about my relationship with Jessica. Those choices had forced Jessica to develop resilience and self-respect. Now Jessica was preparing to pass those qualities on to Eleanor while also considering a career that would extend her influence to other people's children. It was a beautiful example of how individual growth creates expanding circles of positive impact, how the decision to demand better for yourself can ultimately benefit dozens or hundreds of other people. In November, Jessica started classes at the local community college, taking evening courses while Marcus watched Eleanor. She approached her studies with the intensity of someone who had learned not to take opportunities for granted, earning high grades through careful preparation rather than natural ability. "I'm not the smartest person in my classes," she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings, "but I think I might be the most motivated." "Intelligence without effort rarely produces lasting results," I said, "but effort combined with curiosity can overcome almost any obstacle." I'm learning that. I'm also learning how much I don't know about child development, about the science behind effective teaching. It's humbling but exciting. "What's your favorite class?" "Educational psychology. We're studying how children's brains develop, how they process information differently at different stages. It's making me think about Eleanor in new ways, about how I can support her development without pushing her too hard. Such as? Well, apparently reading to babies isn't just about introducing them to books. It's about building neural pathways for language processing. And the way we respond to their emotional expressions actually shapes their ability to regulate their own emotions later. I watched Jessica's face as she spoke, seeing the same excitement that had lit up my own features during my student teaching days. She was discovering the intellectual satisfaction that comes from understanding human development, from seeing patterns and connections that aren't obvious to casual observers. "You're going to be an excellent teacher," I said. "I hope so. I want to be the kind of teacher who sees potential in every child, especially the ones who don't see it in themselves." Like Margaret. Exactly like Margaret. I want to be someone's Mrs. Richardson, someone who plants seeds that grow into beautiful things years later. The comparison moved me more deeply than I could express. Jessica was choosing to honor my legacy, not by following my exact path, but by embodying the values that had guided my career. She was taking the best parts of what she had learned from me and making them her own. December brought Eleanor's first Christmas, a celebration that felt different from any holiday we had shared as a family. There was no financial stress, no unspoken expectations about gifts or obligations. Instead, there was genuine joy in watching Eleanor discover wrapping paper and the simple pleasure of being together without drama or crisis. I gave Jessica a check for her spring semester tuition, not as a rescue or an expectation, but as an investment in her future and a celebration of her commitment to growth. She accepted it gracefully, without the complicated emotions that had surrounded money between us for so many years. "Thank you," she said simply. "This means I can take an extra class next semester, get through the program faster. I'm proud of you for pursuing this dream. I'm proud of me too. For the first time in my adult life, I'm doing something because I believe it's worthwhile, not because I think it will impress other people or solve my problems." Marcus gave me a photo album he had compiled over Eleanor's first few months. Pictures of her sleeping, playing, discovering her hands and feet, being held by all the people who loved her. It was a thoughtful gift that acknowledged my role in Eleanor's life without assuming I needed to be at the center of it. "She's lucky to have you as a grandmother," he said as I flipped through the pages. "I'm lucky to have her as a granddaughter. Jessica talks about you differently now than she used to. With more respect, more appreciation for who you are as a person, rather than just what you could do for her. We've both grown a lot this year. She says the best thing you ever did for her was refuse to save her house. That it forced her to discover what she was capable of when she couldn't rely on anyone else to solve her problems." The observation moved me deeply, not because it vindicated my choices, but because it suggested that Jessica truly understood the gift she had received. The loss of her house had felt like punishment at the time, but it had actually been liberation, freedom from the fantasy that someone else could fix her life, space to discover her own strength and resourcefulness. As we sat around Marcus's parents' dining table that Christmas evening, I looked at the faces gathered there and felt a satisfaction that was deeper than happiness. Eleanor dozed in Jessica's arms, completely trusting in her mother's ability to keep her safe. Marcus and Jessica exchanged the easy affection of partners who had weathered genuine hardship together. The conversation flowed naturally, without the undercurrents of resentment or obligation that had characterized our family gatherings for so many years. "Next Christmas, Eleanor will be walking," Jessica said, stroking her daughter's downy hair. "And getting into everything," Marcus added with a grin. "And probably asking a million questions about everything she sees," I contributed. "I hope so," Jessica said. "I hope she's curious about the world, eager to learn and explore and make her own discoveries. With parents like you two, how could she be anything else?" Quote. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Jessica walked me to my car carrying Eleanor, wrapped in a Christmas blanket. "Mom, I want you to know that this has been the best Christmas I can remember. Not because of the gifts or the food, but because of how it felt." How did it feel? Peaceful. Like everyone here actually wanted to be here, not because they felt obligated, but because they chose to be. Like we were celebrating each other instead of just going through the motions. That's what family gatherings should feel like. I know that now. And I know it's because of the work we've done over the past year, the way we've learned to respect each other's boundaries and choices. Eleanor stirred in her mother's arms, opening her eyes to look around at the dark winter evening with the wide-eyed wonder of someone seeing the world for the first time. She's going to grow up in a different kind of family than I did, Jessica continued. One where love includes respect, where helping each other doesn't mean losing yourself, where being family means choosing each other over and over again. That's a beautiful legacy to give her. It's the legacy you gave me eventually, even when I was too stubborn to recognize it. Driving home through the quiet streets, I thought about the year that was ending and the one about to begin. 12 months ago, I had been a woman defined by her willingness to sacrifice everything for ungrateful recipients. Now I was someone who understood that the highest form of love sometimes looks like stepping back, that the greatest gifts often come disguised as refusals. Margaret's inheritance had given me the freedom to make hard choices. But the real treasure was the knowledge that it's never too late to demand better, to choose dignity over dependence, to love someone enough to let them discover their own strength. Eleanor would grow up in a family that understood these truths, surrounded by adults who had learned to love without losing themselves, to give without depleting their own resources, to support without enabling. She would see healthy boundaries modeled in every interaction, witness the beauty of relationships built on mutual respect rather than desperate need. As I pulled into my parking space, I thought about the two paintings hanging in my kitchen, Margaret's sophisticated landscape and Jessica's amateur watercolor. Soon, perhaps, there would be Eleanor's finger paintings, messy and joyful expressions of a child discovering her own creative voice. The cycle would continue, love and encouragement passing from generation to generation, each person adding their own unique contribution to the family story. But now the story would be one of growth rather than stagnation, of healthy challenge rather than toxic enabling, of love that enhanced rather than diminished everyone it touched. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, grateful for the choices I had made, and excited about the future they had created. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to love well, to see clearly, to believe in people's potential while respecting their autonomy. Tonight, I would rest in the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let someone find their own way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.